Joining us this evening and attending this program here. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background. In the past, the main program has been a Mother's Day luncheon. But we thought we'd try something a little different and open it up a bit. But as I was thinking about it, we are still kind of celebrating Mother's Day. Homes built as strong as time. When I think of my mom, that defines home to me. It also defines strength, and she was timeless as well, like these homes. So as we gather tonight to celebrate homes and families and the strength that is provided by that, there's a lot of thanks to be given tonight to our sponsors, Henle and Lisa Besemer of Ulm Real Estate, who may know a few things about homes and thereby creating that strength and comfort for so many families. They've also provided the door prizes for this evening. To the homeowners who allowed us into their homes, provided information about their homes. Thank you for your support and for being the caretakers of these stories. To the Springfield and Sleepy Eye Historical Societies, thank you for your contribution and your assistance. To the BCHS Research Library, the staff, volunteers, Board of Trustees, and members, thank you for everything. We couldn't do it without you. The Turner ladies for their exceptional service and their commitment and their dedication. I do want to make a note that Dad's here recording this evening, so in the future they will provide a recording to us as well, so you can find this and most of our programs on our website at a later date, like maybe a month out, and on our YouTube channel. And of course, I want to thank Lisa Besemer. This would not have happened without your tireless quest and passion. I do believe that she stopped sleeping, so hopefully after tonight she will experience a blissful slumber. And without further ado, the home's maiden herself, Lisa Besemer.
Thank you. So earlier this year, the great staff at BCHS asked if I would want to present on historical homes in our county. History and homes. It was hook, line, and sinker. That really, they just got me right away. I have always believed that every single person has a story. The joys you have gone through, the hardships, and the sadness that we've endured make us who we are. I fell in love with these people that I'm going to talk to you about tonight and their stories. And of course, I fell in love with these homes as well. We have 5 unique homes that the museum picked. After each home, Mary is going to have a door prize winner. If you haven't entered your name, please do so. And they told me I only have about an hour, so I have so much information that I just couldn't out. So hold on to your seats and keep up. So here we go. So the first house that we're going to be talking about is the Bingham House. And this house, this story is full of twists and turns. This beautiful home, and its story starts with Morrow and Antonia Bingham. Little background on these people. Antonia was born in New Ulm and was the daughter of Henry and Maria Besemer, early pioneers of New Ulm. Maria was born in Germany, and Henry, who was her father, was born in Russia. He operated a mercantile business with his brother. He was also vice president of Citizens Bank. They had 3 daughters, one of which was Antonia. Morrow Bingham was born in Canada, then moved to Vermont when he was 10 years old. In 1876, he came to New Ulm and formed a partnership with his brother, A.W. Bingham, under the firm name of Bingham Brothers, and engaged in the lumber business, later selling this off and devoting their entire attention to buying and selling of grain and coal. Several elevators were erected in neighboring villages, and the firm's activities grew extensively. On October 14, 1882, Antonia and Morrow were married. They had 2 boys, Stanley and Harry. In 1893, Morrow Bingham gave the contract for a new residence on German Street to contractor Massapust. This was in the June New Ulm Review. By August 23rd, the newspaper said it was nearing completion. It was said, for taste of architecture, it will compare with New Ulm's best. On October 15th, the heating apparatus contract was set to go to Mr. Blethyn. And on November 22nd, 1893, the newspaper reported that M.A. Bingham will move into his house this week. Well, this is really kind of unreal, isn't it? June, the contractor was let out. By November, he was moving in. This is 3 floors, all hand labor, beautiful woodwork, heating. Kind of takes longer these days almost to build, with much less character. However, in early August of this year, while the house was being constructed, Antonio was, quote, dangerously ill. Dr. Daniels of St. Peter was here Saturday in consultation with the local physicians regarding her case. I never saw anything more about what her illness was, other than they did have a servant in 1895 by the name of Miss Ida Swenson of Sweden. On January 19, 1896, Mrs. Bingham died. According to her obituary, she was an invalid for many years, but her sudden death was caused by the birth of a child, a little boy, the day before. Both the mother and the child died. Mrs. Bingham was just 37 years old. Her son Harry was 11 years old, and her other son Stanley was 8 years old. The following year, in 1897, their servant left for Sweden. But according to the 1900 census, he had a new servant, Anna Thorpe, and also a housekeeper, Nancy Carson. The boys graduated from Ulm High School and went to school at the university. They both were involved in the automobile business. In August of 1908, Morrow brought home a new wife. According to the New Ulm Review, he surprises his friends. He quietly slipped out of town, telling no one where he was going, and returned Saturday night, bringing with them, to the surprise of everyone, a bride. They married on July 27, 1908 in Baraboo, Wisconsin. At this time, Morrow was 60 years old and Grace was 38, 22 years younger. And she must have been quite something. In June of 1911, she sailed from San Francisco on a trip to Honolulu, then to Japan and China, returning into New Ulm in October. No mention was made of Mr. Bingham coming along. In 1912, she was elected as vice president of the Women's Literary Club, and that year it was noted she had a friend visiting and had a large party for her. In 1920, the census is still showing Morrow and Grace owning and living a home in New Ulm. However, in 1824, Morrow and Grace had a home in Santa Barbara, California. On June 12, 1924, Morrow died at his son's house in New Ulm. He is buried in the city cemetery with his first wife, Antonia. I was not able to locate where Grace was buried. So back to the sons. Stanley married Theodora Sieber in St. Paul. They had 2 daughters. In 1950, Stanley lived in St. Paul and worked as an executive automobile distributor. He, his wife, and 1 daughter are all buried in a cemetery in Mendota Heights. Henry, who also went by the name Harry, graduated from the university in 1907 with a degree in law. He married Olga Mueller of New Ulm in 1913. Remember that Mueller name for later. Henry worked for Bingham Brothers in 1920. In the late 20s, he owned the Bingham on Cass Lake, and he made a pitch that President Coolidge spent part of his summer in northern Minnesota. It must have been a beautiful lodge. In 1945, he sold his lodge and then worked at the Curtis and St. Paul hotels. He must have done very well, because he lived at 784 Linwood Avenue, St. Paul. According to Zillow, this home is now valued at over $1.6 million. Everyone believes Zillow, right? It looks beautiful. Henry and Olga had 2 sons, Henry Jr. and Morrow. Morrow was captain in the U.S. Army, and Henry was an airline pilot. The father, Henry Bingham, died in 1948 and is buried at Mendota Heights by his brother. At the time of his death, the obituary said his wife Olga survived him, but was living in Battle Creek, Michigan. She died in 1973 in California at her son's house. However, she's buried at the New Ulm City Cemetery in the Mueller family plot. So why wouldn't they have lived together, and why would they be buried together at the time of their death? This question I don't know. Okay, back to the house. So Morrow's estate sold the house in 1926. They sold it to Alfred and Helen Mueller, who were Olga's brother and sister-in-law. Alfred and Helen Ziegler were married in Sleepy in 1914, and they had 4 children: Mary, Jane, Bruce, and Mildred. Jane was born in 1916, and she married Joseph Levine. She died in 2006 and is buried in New Ulm. Mary was born and was married to an Elkie. Bruce was born in 1919, and he attended St. Olaf and graduated from DePaul University Law School. He served in World War II. He was married and had 4 children. He was a lawyer in Chicago specializing in workers' compensation, and he died in 2004 and is buried in Ulm. He also had a daughter named Mildred, who was born on August 21st, 1922. She died at her home December 5th, 1924 of sarcoma. Alfred was a prominent attorney in Ulm and also was elected as representative of Brown County in the state legislature and served 2 terms. He practiced law with Sampson, Dempsey, and Bueller in Ulm, and then in 1932 was practicing law by himself. According to the 1930 census, things were looking pretty good for him. They had a servant girl named Clara Willinger, but Alfred was killed in 1932 when the car he was driving somehow left the road. After the death, Helen stayed living in the house and took in boarders to help pay. At this time, Jane was 16, Mary 14, and Bruce was 13. She wanted to stay in the house until the kids were graduated. She had to join the workforce and was in charge of food services at DMLC and later was director at the freshman cafeteria at St. Olaf College in Northfield. She retired in 1954 and lived in Milwaukee and St. Charles near her kids. She was very active in developing the Wisconsin Synod of the Lutheran Church. She is buried at the city cemetery next to her husband. So Helen sold the house in 1943 to H.H. Floor. Guess what? Another attorney. Henry Floor was born in 1882 and he married Aurelia Scanlon of St. Paul. He was a lawyer at one time with Sampson and Dempsey, but then went to work with Floor and Ryan as a trial lawyer in 1934. He was also a city attorney at one time too. Things must have been going really well for Mr. Floor because Mrs. Floor advertised for needing 2 maids to go along to St. Paul with them in 1921. Also interesting is that they were living at 510 South State Street, a beautiful home. He was very active in the New Ulm Civic and Commerce Association, the New Ulm Country Club, and the St. Joseph Society. Henry and Aurelia had 3 children, Henry Jr., Joan, and Mary. Joan was buried in 1916 in St. Paul and died in San Francisco. Mary was born in St. Paul and also died in San Francisco. Henry was born in 1913. He had Down syndrome. They made an apartment for him on the 2nd floor, what would have been the maid's quarters. Henry Jr. died at the state hospital in Faribault in 1976. In 1951, Mr. Floor died at the age of 68. Aurelia, the wife, later married Fletcher Udall. They added more apartments to this house. She would winter in California and she would spend summers here living on the 3rd floor of the house. Floors had bought the house as a single-family residence, but when it was sold, it was a multi-unit home. So in 1961, Aurelia sold it to Walter and Rita Michael. He had his own business, Michael Home Improvement, for 47 years. This was just an investment property for them. Michaels then sold it to Lucy Stegeman in 1970. She also used it as an investment property. Some of you may remember that her and her husband ran a Sportsman Grill in New Ulm. Lucy sold it to Todd and Shannon McKee in 1998. At the time that they bought it, there was 5 apartment units in the house. They sold their home and moved into the front main floor apartment with their 2 daughters, Miranda and Corinne. They started with electricity updates, windows and frames and mopboards. They still had other renters that lived there as well. There were stair treads, but Todd built the stair rails, which are absolutely amazing and mimic the shell on the fireplace mantle. They removed all 29 radiators and put in forced heat and central air. In 2006, they opened it as a bed and breakfast. All 43 windows are original, and all have been refinished and worked on them as they still have the weights in them. The home is nothing short of amazing. Shannon tells the story of one time Todd was leaving to go fishing, and her and her sister tore open a wall while he was gone. They would look at floorboards and trim to figure out what the original plan of the house was. I remember seeing Todd with a heat gun on scaffolding to remove the paint from the exterior. They did it the hard way, but the right way, and the wood exterior shows the work that went into it. A big help to them was Marie Ryan. Marie's home was at 300 South German and was also built by a Bingham. This was A.R. Bingham's house, and Mara was his brother. The house was very similar to Marie's, and she invited Todd and Shannon over to her home and come to see if she could help them. The main floor consists of a beautiful foyer with an open staircase, a living room that probably at one time had 2 rooms, probably a living room and a parlor, but is now one large room with the original fireplace. There's also a formal dining room. McKeith's transformed what would have been the kitchen and library at one time into a sensational kitchen in 2020, a must for the wonderful breakfast that they serve their guests. The gorgeous stairway leads you to the second floor where there are 4 guest rooms. Originally there was 3 bedrooms and a servant's quarter. The rooms are the Elijah, which is named after Mark Elijah, the Henle, in other words, Mary, who helped them, who was their friend and relative who encouraged McKeith's to open the B&B. The McKeith room is named after Todd's family, and Lothard's room, which is named after Shannon's grandfather. The 3rd floor is where Todd and Shannon have their private quarters. From the walk up the beautiful wraparound porch, the knocking on the wooden double doors, I was truly, truly amazed at the care that had been put back into this home. And while some bed and breakfasts that I stayed at would not be suitable to be single-family residences again, this one would be just as lovely. Thank you to the McKeiths for the work that you have done. I'd like to thank the McKeiths for this. So Todd and Shannon, can you please stand up?
We're going to give a door prize after each home. And they're all from decor stores in Ulm, where you can buy something sweet and beautiful for your home. So the first one will be to Ada Zinnia. Not looking. Goes to Yvonne Weber.
It's really hard to get good help when your daughter is a clicker. I'm not able to be a clicker and a reader at the same time, guys. Sorry. Okay, the next house is the W.W. Smith house. This was also really interesting. So William Watkins Smith was born in 1857 and was raised on his family's 600-acre farm in Wisconsin. He attended Lawrence College in Appleton, Wisconsin, and then worked a year in South Dakota. He married Ada Cogswell Bunker, who was from Minnesota, on September 19, 1885. Her family came from Cassim, and she was employed in Sleepy at the time. With Clarence Griffith, he opened the Merchants Bank in Sleepy on August 1st, 1891. At this time, Sleepy was only 10 years old. Mr. Smith and Mr. Griffith gradually built a strong foundation and earned the trust of the local farmers and business people. After the first year, the Merchants Bank was off to a good start. Although Sleepy was only a village of 700 people, deposits had already reached $65,000. In 1902, the bank became the first national bank. 5 years later, the bank had deposits of well over $360,000, which gives an indication of how well Smith and Griffith were doing at their venture. He served as the bank's cashier, and he was a principal stockholder for over 50 years. He never wanted any other title. He was a very successful businessman. He was also associated with the banks in Evan, Elbow Lake, Echo, and Roselle. He was a member of the Sleepy Board of Education. Governors Nelson and Chloe honored him with an appointment on their staffs with the title of Major. He was a staunch Republican and served his party as a member of the state central committee during the campaigns of several Minnesota governors. He was affiliated with the Masonic fraternity and the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Mr. Smith built his home in 1900. He built on 4 city lots, one which later sold to Frank Meyer next door. The home was finished in 1901. It is noted that Mr. Griffith, who was W.W. Smith's partner at the bank, also built a large Victorian-style home in Sleepy near the lake a few years prior to Mr. Smith building his. This could have inspired or maybe challenged him to build his dream home. Mr. Griffith's home is at 318 Current Street Southwest. When Mr. Smith built his, it was even bigger. Mr. Smith never drove and always had a chauffeur. His car always carried the license number 12. His chauffeur in the late 1920s was Floyd Gregg. He drove him back and forth to work and often took him to Minneapolis. He had a big Nash. So I was curious when I was in Sleepy last week, just how far was this bank office to his house? 4 blocks. Not only did they have a chauffeur, but according to this 1910 census, they had a family, they had a servant girl living with them also. Her name was Nettie Young, and she was 18 years old. In 1930, Florence Severson was her 23-year-old servant. William and Ada had 3 sons. Arthur was born in 1887, William Jr. in 1892, and Herbert was born in 1899. William Watkins Smith died in 1933 and is buried at the Home Cemetery in Sleepy. The funeral was held at the First Congregational Church. Now the kids. Let's start with William Jr. He was the middle child. I know, Mom, I won't get started on the middle child here, but he was, well, actually for the family. He was born in 1893. He was a tank driver in World War I in the Army. At the time of World War I, he was married to Helen Estelle Humphrey. In 1920, William was living in Wisconsin and was a cashier at a bank. He had 1 daughter named Jane. They also had a servant girl named Lillian. The daughter, Jane, was born in 1916 and died in Pennsylvania in 2006. She is buried in New Hampshire along with her husband, who was a professor at a private college in Milwaukee. Around 1950, William decided to leave his bank job in Wisconsin and went into another line of business in California, and that's where they ended up living, was in Los Angeles. We'll come back to the black sheep in a little bit. But the next son we're going to talk about is Herbert. He was the youngest son and was born in 1899 in Sleepy. He was married to Cornelia Langmack. He was vice president of First National Bank of Antigua, Wisconsin, worked in Chicago in investments, and then came back to Sleepy in the 1940s. When William Watkins Smith died, it was Herbert who appeared to be most likely to follow his footsteps at the Sleepy Bank. From 1933 to 1940, Henry Dumeyer ran the bank, but then in 1940, after the death of Calvin Griffith, that's when Herbert was named vice president. While he was executive vice president of the First National Bank of Sleepy, he was also involved with the First National Bank of Roseau, and he also had an interest in the Citizens Bank in St. James. He was an active member of the Heating Commission and director of the telephone company. He was a member of the Masonic fraternities. Also, Herbert and Camelia, or Connie as she was called, they never had any children. Herb was said to drive a big Chrysler, the biggest one in town. He was only 52 years old when he died. According to his death certificate, for 20 years he had suffered with ulcers. He died at Abbott Hospital on January 4, 1951. At the time of Herbert's death, Herbert and Connie lived in the Smith house. Ada, the mother, would spend winters in St. Petersburg, Florida, and then summers at the big house in Sleepy. Well, apparently Ada did not like Connie. After Herbert died, Connie ended up going to California to live with her sister. Eventually, she married a man named Henry Ballard. She came back often to Sleepy, according to the Sleepy Herald, to visit friends and would stay at their homes. Lo and behold, now we need to talk about the oldest son, Arthur. Arthur Bunker Smith, his middle name was his mother's maiden name, was born June 17, 1886. He attended boys' military school in Wisconsin and then attended Northwestern University in Illinois. He married Cora Lincoln. They got their marriage license in Hennepin County. She was 22, he was 27. And in 1920, they were living with Cora's mother in Minneapolis. Arthur and Cora had 2 sons, Lincoln, born in 1915, and Robert, born in 1920. Arthur at the time was a bank examiner. In 1940, they were living in Minneapolis yet with sons Lincoln, who was a salesman in advertising, and Robert. On February 1st, 1945, Cora passed away suddenly. So now, apparently, Arthur is a bit down on his luck, but that's about to change. Again, Herbert died in 1951. After Herbert dies, so this is 6 years after Cora died, after Herbert dies, Ada is living in Minneapolis, where Arthur lives. Only 9 months after Herbert dies, his mom dies, Ada dies. The funeral is held in the Congregational Church again in Sleepy Eye. Well, Arthur inherited everything from Ada. The house, the banks, everything. She completely left a little child out of the picture. In October 1951, it was noted in the Sleepy Eye Herald that Arthur sold his home in Minneapolis and moved back to Sleepy Eye. And since Herbert had died, Arthur then occupied the big house. He owned it. Arthur then served on the board of directors at First National Bank. But according to Dave Carr, who was hired by him and worked for him for a couple of years, Arthur loved hunt and fish. He would go to Africa, South America, Canada, and Alaska to go fishing and hunting. He drove a big yellow Cadillac. And on June 23rd, 1955, he marries for the second time to Myrtle Peterson. Life is good. Arthur passed away then in 1964. The story was told that upon Arthur's death, either one of his sons would have come back to Sleepy Eye, to the bank, and to the house, but that Arthur had made everything out to prevent that. And presently, his new wife sold the home and the bank stock. The stock went to a holding company and it was then bought by Stephen Adams and another man. Most of the bank staff remained the same, but it was no longer a locally owned bank as it had been. It was said that the house was sold. When the house was sold, Lincoln and Robert came to Sleepy Eye with a truck to remove whatever they could of their grandmother's furniture. Arthur, Cora, and Myrtle, the husband and the 2 wives, are all buried at Lakewood Cemetery. So remember that black sheep William? Well, he tried to get some inheritance, and why he fell out of favor with his mom is not known. According to the Sleepy Eye Herald Dispatch, in September of '52, a settlement was reached after a 4-day trial in the Smith estate. William had contested the estate at about $360,000. Apparently, Ada's will was dated June 1951. That was only just a few months after Herbert had passed away. William claimed undue influence on the part of Arthur. Wonder what this settlement was. Irregardless, Arthur did indeed have the bank and the house and lived a very, very rich life. Okay, now to the house. The house is on Linden Street, and this is a 2.5-story clapboard sheathed home. It combines both Queen Anne Victorian and classical revival architectural elements. The Steinke Seidel Lumber Company were contracted to build this house. The 2nd-story roof overhang, 4 attic gables, and 1-story wrap around the front porch. And they all utilize medallions under the eaves. 2 large interior chimneys pierce the roof on the west and on the south. You enter the home through the 2 beautiful leaded glass doors into the expansive foyer with 10-foot-high ceilings, fireplace, and ornate woodwork. 2 sets of doors create an airlock to keep out the northerly winds. The formal parlor connects to a sitting room with a large bay window and 3 sets of pocket doors. These rooms also have heavy doorway drapes. They're known as portieres. That saved the owners from heating rooms they didn't use. It is easy to imagine how elegant dinner parties must have been in this home's dining room, surrounded by a fireplace, built-in china cabinet, and crystal chandelier. As an extra architectural detail, each of the formal rooms features a different inlaid floor pattern. The original library with built-in bookshelves, fireplace, and a Steuben light fixture serve today as an office. This is where the Smith men met with their associates to discuss business. The grand staircase still retains an original Tiffany newel post fixture, as well as 3 beautiful stained glass windows at the first landing. The stairway is so long that midway up exists a small bench to sit down and rest. The 2nd floor features a master suite, 3 guest rooms, and 3 full baths. The designer was ahead of his time, as the rooms all have closets with built-in drawers. Varying wood species are used throughout the home, including quarter sawn, red oak, and American chestnut. Additional historic elements include transom windows and many original light fixtures. Also, a working servant's call box. This switching system still operates in the kitchen. To get the maid's attention, there is a button in each room of the house. When a button is pushed, a bell sounds and a lever indicates which room it came from. A servant's staircase leads to the finished third floor, which is complete with living room, office, bedroom, walk-in closet, and bath. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it is much the same as it was when it was first built. The house has 4 fireplaces. The woodwork downstairs features cherry and a quarter-stone red oak, which is cut against the grain to bring out a tiger stripe pattern. The upstairs is American chestnut woodwork, and let's see, it's really, did that twice. All right, sorry about that. The carriage house, a hipped roof structure, was used to store the Smith's carriages and the horses. Horses were boarded in what is now the box stall bedroom on the first floor. It is reported that Smith owned the first automobile in Sleepy Eye, and shortly after, the carriage house was converted to a garage. In late 1990s, the carriage house was converted to guest rooms for the inn. The Arthur estate was they sold the house to Edna Schmidt, who was a local teacher, and they sold that in 1966. She lived in the house for only a short time. For 25 years, no one really lived in the home at all. Edna's guardians, Lowell and Elaine Case of Edina, sold her belongings. At the time it was sold, the exterior needed a lot of attention. Dennis and Mary Hoffardy bought the house in 1994, and they're the ones that turned it into a bed and breakfast. They also updated the electrical, added a new roof, remodeled the bathrooms, and installed new water lines and sewer lines. The maid's room and also the playroom were converted to bathrooms. Leo and Marcia Durkowski bought the bed and breakfast in 2006. They remodeled the third floor to include their own living quarters. When Smiths lived in the house, the third floor was primarily used for storage. They also restored the front porch. Then, Derek and Delmy Warman bought the house in 2016 with furnishings for $360,000. Derek works for the State Department and is stationed in Africa. I was able to talk to him a couple times about his thoughts on the house. He has been employed by the State Department for 24 years, and this is his 7th country overseas. He's been in Africa for about 3.5 years. He grew up in Moorhead, and about 10 years ago, after always living in State Department housing, he yearned for a house of his own, and him and his wife both love old homes. They found this house on the website and fell in love with it. His family, his original family, his home family, still lives in Moorhead, so they wanted to be in Minnesota as well. He plans on retiring within a year or 2, and then they will make Sleepy Eye their home. They plan on making some updates, he said, to the kitchen, and may end up removing one of the bathrooms since it won't be a bed and breakfast anymore. They have 4 kids of various ages. And thank you to the Sleepy Eye Historical Society for all the help that they gave me as well. Okay, door prize, Vanna.
Okay, this gift certificate is to Inspire, and it is Becky Sowers.
Now we're going to talk about Fender Farm. We must begin with the grand old man of New Ulm, Colonel Wilhelm Fender. There's actually a street named after him, the Fender Street. William Fender was born in 1826 in Henle, Germany. He came to America and married Catherine Pfau in Cincinnati in 1851. Catherine was born in Bavaria in 1832. They at one point lived in Newport, Kentucky. In 1856, though, they came with a group of citizens from Cincinnati looking for a place to start a new German town. That search brought them to New Ulm. At this time, New Ulm was 2 years old, and the Chicago Land Society was struggling with lack of money. Well, the Cincinnati group had money. They ended up buying a half interest in the town. Mr. Fender was named as agent and manager for the Cincinnati Association. That infused new life in New Ulm. Mr. Fender bought 160 acres just outside of New Ulm on the Casey Road. He served as postmaster. He owned and operated a sawmill. He was an active Turner member of New Ulm in Ulm, Germany. and he was one of the organizers of the Turner Society in Cincinnati. He also helped organize the New Ulm Turnverein in November of 1856. In fact, the very first Turner Hall was located on this land. From 1861 to 1865, he served in the military during the Civil War. He was a heroic lieutenant and fought in the Battle of Shiloh on the banks of the Tennessee River. Upon learning that New Ulm was under attack during the Dakota conflict in 1862, he was sent north with the 1st Minnesota Mounted Rangers and was named Lieutenant Colonel of the regiment. He was placed in command of Fort Ridgely. He was a Minnesota State Senator. He was elected State Treasurer in 1876 and served 2 terms. And during this time, the family lived primarily in St. Paul, except for summer months, which they would spend on the farm. He also served as mayor of New Ulm. After returning to New Ulm from St. Paul, he opened an insurance and real estate office. And he was Justice of the Peace and officiated the very first wedding in New Ulm. The happy couple was Petronola Adams and William Jansen. William and Catherine, besides doing all these other things, had 15 children. On the farm was built a log cabin. The picture here was sketched by his daughter Josephina. William Jr. was born in 1852 in Cincinnati. He came to New Ulm at the age of 4. He was educated in St. Paul, then returned to New Ulm and worked with his dad, Wilhelm, in insurance. He was a secretary at New Ulm Savings and Loan. In 1905, he established the Pioneer Nursery. He married Emily Kiesling in 1880, and they had 4 children. One had died very young. Emily died from tuberculosis on March 1880. At the time, the oldest child was only 7 years old. William then married Sophie Berendt in October of 1893. She was the daughter of Julius Berendt, the designer of Herman Monument. William and Sophie had 6 more kids. William died in 1924. Sophie lived until 1947 and lived at her home at 900 South Broadway. Her granddaughter, Ruthie Stoll, and her husband, Reuben, lived in that home until 2018. Catherine, also known as Kate, was born in Newport, Kentucky in 1854. She married Charles Albert and had 5 children. They lived in St. Paul. And when she died in 1919, she had her husband's body exhumed and reburied in New Ulm. That's a strong New Ulm person there. Joanna was born in 1855, also in Kentucky. She married Carl Franz in New Ulm. She died in 1876, giving birth to her only son, William. Louisa, she was born September 24th, 1857 in Milford. She married Dr. Gottfried Stam in 1880 and they lived in St. Paul. They had 3 children, and she died in 1929, and she's buried at the Oakland Cemetery. Josephina, also known as Josie, was born in 1859. She lived most of her life in St. Paul and taught German. She never married. She moved back to New Ulm and took care of her dad after her mom died. She then lived in California a few years after her dad died. She came back to New Ulm in 1931 and died at 319 North Broadway, her home, on June 14, 1938. Carolina was born in 1860 and died in 1877. And a son, Carl, was born and died in 1862. Frederick was born in 1863 at Fort Ridgely. He went to school in New Ulm and studied accounting at LaSalle Extension University. He worked in the insurance business with his dad. He was also on the fire department for many years, serving as chief from 1925 to 1930. Even at age 90, he would still go on fire calls to police the crowd. He was cashier at Grand County Bank and later at State Bank, which was founded in 1901. He was postmaster several times. He was president of the New Ulm Rural Telephone Company and one of the organizers of it. He was a city councilor for 14 years, and he was on the New Ulm Public Safety Commission. He died in 1958 at the age of 94. His wife was Louise Neumann, and she died 39 years before he did, and they had 4 children. Daughter Amelia, she was born also in Milford in 1865. She went to Mankato State Teachers College. She taught in Mulligan Township and later in Ulm. The story that she was most proud of as a teacher was when she was teaching in Mulligan Township, the school board told her not to send children home if she sees a tornado or knows of a tornado coming. Well, a tornado was coming. She looked at the roof of the school and decided it was the best if she sent all of her kids home. They all made it home safely. The school board chastised her for sending them home and not listening to them. Well, when they came to the school, they found it completely demolished. She married Louis A. Fritchie on June 4, 1890 in Berlin, Germany. And we will talk about her more in the Schmidt-Fritchie house later on. Emma was born in 1868 in Milford. She attended Mankato Teachers College and taught in St. Paul. She married Charles Hauser, and they lived in St. Paul. Rather a beautiful home she had as well. Wilhelmina was born in 1870 in Ulm, and she attended Winona State Normal School and was a kindergarten teacher in St. Paul. She married Heinrich Lenholt in Berlin, Germany. They lived in Landau, Germany during World War I. He died during the war. She had 5 stepchildren at that time. In 1921, she and one of the stepchildren moved to St. Paul, and she taught kindergarten again until 1938. New Ulm was always home to her, and after retirement, she spent a great deal of time here with her sister, Mrs. Ritchie. She wrote a book, Memories Trail, with Grace May, with an 1954 centennial celebration about the history of her family. She lived the last few years at the Protestant home in St. Paul, and she's buried at the Ulm City Cemetery. Son Albert was born in 1873 in New Ulm, and he went to Mankato Teachers College and then graduated from the University of Minnesota with a law degree. They had one son and one daughter. He was New Ulm City Attorney, and he was kicked out of office by the governor of Minnesota during World War I, as he was said to be too German. He served 8 years on the House of Representatives. He served on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. He lived at 619 Center Street. He was a Democratic candidate for governor in 1934. He served in the National Guards for 8 years. In 1913, he was a major and accompanied the army to the Mexican border. At the time of his death, he was a senior member of the Fender and Nierengarten law firm. He played the zither and violin very well. In fact, he wrote the music and the words to My Daddy Is Coming Home, which was copyrighted just before his death. He died in New Ulm in 1946. Alwina was a daughter that was born in 1875, and she died in 1881. And Carl was born in 1878, and he also died in 1881. They're both buried at the city cemetery. Herman was born in 1872. He attended University of Minnesota Agricultural School and graduated in 1890. He was a charter member of the New Ulm Rural Telephone Company and the Community Co-op Oil Association. In 1910, he was elected secretary of the New Ulm Farmers Elevator and held that position for 30 years. He was a charter member of the Minnesota Valley Burial Association and was secretary for 15 years. He also ran a milk route. He was a Milford Township clerk. He was a dairy farmer and had a herd of purebred Hereford cattle. The name of the dairy was Riverside Dairy. He married Anna Wiedemann in March of 1897 at the Fender House on Broadway. This is the house that Colonel and Catherine lived in after they moved to town from the farm. Isn't this a beautiful home? Well, in 1851, it was torn down to make a used car lot. Later, it became the space where Matson's grocery store was. Then later, A&P had regional offices. They had 3 daughters, and they had 1 baby that died in infancy. Leona Alma was born in 1900. She married Thomas Culver in Minneapolis, and he was a traveling salesman and lived in St. Louis Park. But during the Depression, with 1 child, when times were tough in the sales business, they moved to New Ulm and lived in a house that was owned by Herman. They lived there for a few years until the young family could get back on their feet. Leona was an elementary teacher. The daughter, Marilyn, lives in Kenosha, Wisconsin. They are buried at the Lakewood Cemetery in Hennepin County. Elvina Louise Fender was born in 1903. She was named after the Fender aunt that had died young. She was a registered nurse and she lived in Pasadena, California. When she was 52, she married Edwin Whittington. She died in 1986 and he died in 1991, and they are buried in the city cemetery. And then again, they had the baby Fender that was born about 1908. But Marguerite is who we're going to talk about. She was born June 28, 1907. She went on to school to be a teacher. While she was a substitute teacher in Comfrey, she met Harold Runk, and he offered her a ride home. Well, the rest, as they say, is history. Harold was born in 1908 in Springfield. He was a surveyor when he met Marguerite. They married February 16, 1935 at the Fender home. Alvin Runk and her sister Leona Culver were witnesses. They took a honeymoon and drove to California to visit Aunt Josie, and then came home and farmed her family farm for 66 years. When Harold and Marguerite got married, her folks built a house at 709 South State Street. Herman and Anna celebrated the 50th wedding anniversary with a dinner here at Turner Hall. Marguerite and Harold had 3 kids. Richard was born November 21st, 1937. He graduated also from the University of Minnesota. He married Barbara and they had 5 daughters. Richard passed away May 12, 2021. And if these walls could talk, they could tell us all sorts of stories about Richard. Alan was born June 4th, 1941. He also graduated from the University of Minnesota. He married Helen Hill and they had 1 son. They are retired and live in Florida. Then we have Willis. The baby was born November 24th, 1946. He was a graduate of the University of Minnesota. He married Kristen Krasson, and they have 2 sons, Joel and Jeff. Christine, just like her Runk predecessors, serves on the Milford Township Board. When Willis and Chris were married, Marguerite's sisters expected her to give up the Fender house and move to town, as did all the family before them. But Marguerite loved the house and the farm and stayed there almost until the end of her life. She died in 2001 at the Winthrop Nursing Home. Harold also loved the farm, and he was still splitting wood at the age of 100. He died in 2012. They are both buried in the city cemetery. The farm is now a sesquicentennial farm. In the last 10 years, Willis and Chris, along with their sons and carpenter Rodney Lambert, have refurbished this beautiful home. I'll explain more in a second. First of all, the timeline of the house. First, in 1856, there was a log cabin there. They added on a wooden structure. In about 1897, they built this white farmhouse. Herman and Anna were coming home from a Junior Pioneers event from here at Turner Hall in 1913, and they saw their house was burning. It was then that Herman decided he was going to build a house that would never burn. So the house was built with blocks hauled from Oxford from Fairfax. It was the Fairfax Cement Works began after George Soffert bought a hand-tamping concrete block machine for $68 and started making concrete products out of his garage in 1910. He offered to build William Lucasberg, who had just lost his house to a fire, a new house in Fairfax. Thus began the relationship. Mr. Soffert had the knowledge and Mr. Lucasberg had the financial backing. In 1916, American Art Stone incorporated and moved to New Ulm. This is the house he built, Mr. Lucasberg. Look familiar? This house is located in Fairfax and is very similar to the Fender house. So back to the Fenders. While the house was being built, Marguerite was only 6 years old, so she stayed with the Wiedemans, a relative that lived just down the Casey Road. They cooked all the meals in the garage. When the house was framed, they lived in the attic. After each floor was finished, they would move into it. The kitchen has a wonderful built-in cabinet. It was supposed to have a pass-through to the kitchen, but Anna did not want this. This built-in is gorgeous in the formal dining room. Look at the detail to the molding of the cabinet and the plate rails that are still in place. This is the original light fixture. One of the globes broke, and Chris worked with sleeve stained glass to make it almost exactly the same as the others. Much of the Runk Fender furniture is still in the house. There are many leaded glass windows. The view from this window is beautiful. There are 2 sets of pocket doors that still function in the house. This is a view from the sitting room to the front porch. The staircase, newel post, and stained glass window are all original. The front door with inlaid tile is made even more gorgeous with the way Chris painted the door with a gold accent. This is the room that Harold and Marguerite were married in, right in front of the window. The door next to the stained glass window leads back to the kitchen. It's about 2 steps down. These stair steps corners, these desk corners, make cleaning your steps a snap. That's what the advertisement told me that I saw last night. They are attached at the juncture with 1 nail. All of these at the Fender house are original. They are only missing 1. This is such a nice wide staircase here. This bench is in the primary bedroom. Chris and Willis added this bench for more storage. It truly looks like it's always been there. Look at the leaded glass window, even in the bedroom. This house had 5 bedrooms at one time. Look at this view from the 2nd floor balcony. The attic is very large and can easily walk around in it. The ladder gives access to the roof. They used the original foundation of the basement and added on to it. This blue room was the original 1880 basement. Also, this house had electricity and plumbing long before the neighbors. I have to share 2 crazy stories. So the first one is about Anna. So in 1941, Anna won a car at the Brown County Fair. It was a 1941 Plymouth. The Rungs still have that car today. There were some rumblings at the time if she would be allowed to win, because Herman, her husband, was on the fair board. But she got the car, and Red Martinka drove it out there. And she never had a driver's license either. So Chris had a Milford Township meeting tonight. Otherwise, she was going to bring the car and have it parked in front. But you'll see them driving around, and they've got a really cool sign that they've made also. You'll know that it's the Anna's car that she won at the Brown County Fair. Okay, one last story, and it has to do with Aunt Lena. She was William Jr.'s wife. Real name was Emily, but many in the family had nicknames. Herman's girls would take a horse named Doll and a buggy to school and park it in Lena's garage. Leona, being the oldest, always got to drive the buggy. Aunt Lena lived at 419 North Washington Street, which is close to where Colonel Fender's house was on North Broadway and close to school. Funny story is told by Chris is that the girls would always have to get a pail of beer from at the back door of the nearest beer joint for Aunt Lena. They would also stay there in winter for school if the weather was bad. I would like for Chris and Willis Rung to stand up, and I thank them so much. I so enjoyed my time spent at the Fender Farm. Carola was also one of the single ladies, was born in 1898 and she died in 1975 of colon cancer. Gertrude was born in 1901. She worked over 20 years as a bookkeeper at Del Monte. The sisters called her the breadwinner. She died in 1988. So the sisters, there was actually 6 of them that were featured in the St. Paul Pioneer Press on January 21st, 1962. In this article and talking to some of the neighbors, this is what I found. So all of the other ones married, but the 6 sisters lived in the house from the time they were born to the time they died. And it was the 6 of them. So that's why it was so interesting to talk to some of the neighbors. So in talking to the neighbors and the St. Paul Pioneer Press, this is what they would say. 4 of them would go daily to church, but the other 2 would stay home as they would prepare breakfast. If one of the 6 had a suitor that seemed interested, the others would get jealous and sabotage the relationship. Because Dad felt so bad, he gave each one of the 6 daughters a diamond ring. They kept fireworks on their 3rd floor. They would scare off blackbirds with fireworks or shoot them. They didn't like cats either. In summer, when they returned from church, they would remove their dresses outside and hang them out to air. They would still have on their long slips. According to Jay Van Kira, they made a mean Manhattan with a secret ingredient. The table was always set, it was always formal. If you saw them scattered around the yard, in different areas of the yard, that meant they were getting on each other's nerves. They called Dottie or Mary, the neighborhood girls, to come over and get leftovers to take home if they had too many leftovers. All summer, Viola cooked breakfast for Tucker Loomis. They rotated chores, so they had chores like yard work, polishing silver. They even took turns being the hostess of the house. They had a mango in their porch which they would use on Monday mornings to press napkins, tablecloths, sheets, etc. They took naps at 2 o'clock every day. The neighbor kids would know it was nap time as all the shades would go down. And just a couple of the sisters drove. They played bridge every single day at 4 o'clock. They would mix up a big pitcher of daiquiris, and 4 of them would play. The other 2 would get supper ready. And apparently they liked to mix their drinks strong. Some loved to travel. They always traveled in pairs. They would bring Christmas ornaments home for their tree. There was a closet by the front door that had a nailer in it, kind of resembled a confessional. For Halloween, they would hand out homemade popcorn balls to the neighborhood kids. They always wore dresses, never wore pants. So the house, look at this beautiful home. Notice in the early picture the wrought iron around the top of the home. This is called cresting and was associated with the Second Empire architecture, where such decoration stands out against the sharp lines of a mansard roof. It became popular in the late 19th century with mass-produced sheet metal cresting patterns available by the 1890s, about when this house was built. The front and back porches have white inlaid tile floors with the name Lair set in dark tiles. There's a beautiful staircase and wood parquet floors. This slide shows the family in front of the original staircase. The only difference is the ornamental newel post. In the family picture, it was a figurine, and the picture now is just a candelabra. The dining room has a built-in china cabinet with beveled glass doors. Woodwork in this room is solid oak, which has been stained a forest green. It was large enough to handle a table set for 14. The sunroom had tri-fold beveled French doors, which allowed entrance to the sun porches on 2 levels on the south side. On the main level, the sun porch is off the dining room. The Lair's furniture in the sun porch came from Mexico, and the wool carpet was handmade in India. It had a big kitchen with lots of windows on the east side. The kitchen was updated in the 1990s. The living room walls were covered, and still are, with Japanese grass cloth. The living room is still the same today. Originally, there were 2 rooms, a sitting room and a parlor, but now there's just one large room. Presently, the basement is a great recreation room. It also has a beautiful staircase going to it. This house consists of 3 stories, plus a very small attic space. The staircase is mahogany, which Johanssons, who were owners after the Lairs, were told was constructed in the Philippines. The stained glass in the staircase in the corner bathroom, those windows are original. This is the grand staircase to the 2nd floor, and also a servant's staircase. Originally, it had 6 bedrooms, with the boys' quarters on the 3rd floor. Now it has 5 bedrooms. The master now has a sitting room and a private bath, so perhaps one of the bedrooms was taken for this remodel. The 3rd floor now is a finished family room with a bedroom and a bathroom. The construction began in 1885 and was completed in 1888. Frank Jan was the contractor, and it cost approximately $8,000 to build. There are a total of 19 rooms with just under 3,500 finished feet of living space. There is a large grape arbor that is held up by huge columns. There was a fountain and a pond in the backyard. There still is a hitching post. There is a Martin house, and there's 2 lions outside the house that are no longer there. It was also first or among the first homes in Springfield to have running water. Although indoor plumbing and running water were not commonplace homes for that time period, the Lair house always had running water. A water tank was contained on the top of the house. Pumps in the basement were used to get the water up to the 3rd floor. Each bedroom had their own wash bowl. It was the birthplace for 8 out of the 12 Lair children, and also the setting for 3 weddings. Mr. Lair also constructed 3 homes for his 3 sons. All 3 of these homes were within a few blocks of the Lair home. The first one was 204 Jackson. That one was built in 1913. The next is 124 Sanborn, built in 1914. And the last one was 212 Jackson, built in 1918. The Lair estate sold the house in 1990 to Kent and Donna Johansson. They owned it from 1990 to 2000. They built a north side addition. They sold the house to Kurt and Teresa Beckman. They just sold the house February 29th to a young couple that I stalked on Facebook, Wilson and Joel Hoffman. He is a dairy farmer and their family farm is by Morgan. They bought it for $305,000. I would like to have the wonderful people from Springfield stand up. Just this whole table here, okay, table, friend, my new friends, stand up. This Springfield Historical Society, all these people, and talked about their house, and they were absolutely wonderful and so helpful in this too. So thank you very much. And I'd also like to recognize Ellen Van Cure is here too. Dr. Van Cure, can you stand up also? And she does remember going and visiting her aunts, and it was always the aunts. It wasn't like one aunt wasn't any, they were always the aunts. So she remembers going to those and visiting them as well. Okay, Dan.